It's time to warm ourselves up with some new flaming cardboard in form of Flamwells this time, a 5Ds era archetype used by Yusei Fudo in the same context as the Batteryman archetype was used. And I'm listing Yusei as the user of the archetype because I am not sure if we've even seen or heard the name of the owner. So if I do manage to find the correct owner, I'll maybe post him in the comments or in the description or something. But anyway, Flamewells are also a dual terminal archetype, that's where they first debuted, and their focus is somewhat non-existent. Well, these are separated into two sub-archetypes, that being the original Flamewells and the Neo Flamewells. The Neo Flamewells, the latter of which are focused on disrupting the opponent's graveyard by banishing stuff from their graveyard. So let's take a look at them, because they are the innovators of quite a few things. First of all, we start off with a level 1 normal monster, which is a level 1 tuner, Flamvell Guard. It has 100 attack and 2000 defense, which is beyond massive for a level 1 monster. And this is actually one of their better monsters, since it was actually ran in pretty much everything, since it's a level 1 tuner special summonable by unexpected die. 1 for 1, it could be used as a material for cards of consonance, since it's a dragon tuner. So yeah, this one is definitely a card full of stories to tell. But in an actual Flamewell deck, you might or might not see him being ran due to his enormous defense value. Yeah, this is actually a problem in the archetype, and we'll soon see how with their first actual effect monster, Flamevell POUN. This is a level 1 Pyro monster with 200 attack and defense, and when this card is destroyed by battle and sent to the graveyard, you can add one monster with 200 defense from your deck to your hand. Now, to somebody unfamiliar with the archetype and fire type in general, the thing with Flamewells and basically most of the fire-based attribute monsters is the fact that they have exactly 200 defense. But the thing here is, with POUN, is actually an excellent searcher due to the fact that he does not only search out fire monsters with 200 defense, he literally searches any monster with 200 defense, making his search pool as wide as over 100 cards, which is nothing to scoff at. So yeah, he searches most of the cards in the archetype, and as far as effect monsters goes, POUN is somewhat of a trio, because there are no better options when it comes to searching other than one of their other monsters, which we'll get to soon. So yeah, POUN is among the better cards. So yeah. Anyway, next up we have their final level 1, Flamewell Baby, which is another level 1, this one being a tuner this time. And during your main phase, you can send this card from your hand to the graveyard to select one face-up fire monster you control and have it gain 400 attack. Well, I'll give it credit for the fact that the attack boost is permanent. This will be a completely different this segment of the video will be spoken in a completely different tone if the attack boost was actually not permanent. But the only purpose of this thing existing is to basically set up your graveyard with level 1 tuners, which you will then proceed to revive, most notably with one of their spell cards, well, their only spell cards. So yeah, but it is a level 1 tuner, so I might as well throw it a bone, and it's actually the only archetypal level 1 tuner besides Flamewell Guard. And yeah, and now we move on to their level 2, for that being Flamevell Dragnov. This is a level 2 with 1100 attack and 200 defense. When this card is destroyed by battle and sent to the graveyard, inflict 500 damage to your opponent. Then you can remove from play this card in your graveyard along with one face-up fire monster you control to add another copy of this card from your deck to your hand. Okay, this you can either run this and have it search itself out at a cost arguably the same level as Shock's Troops of the Ice Barrier, which is not impressive or anything, or you can just run Ukazi or Hinotama or any other better burn card that's available, because this thing is like super slow and very inconsistent, and it requires you to not only banish a copy of itself, but to also send a fire monster you control to the graveyard in order to search another copy of itself. Yeah, just not worth it. Just don't pretend this one doesn't exist. And now we actually entered the Neo Flamvell lineup of cards for a short while. First of which we have Neo Flamvell Origin. This is our level 2 and it's a tuner. This time it's their last level 2. And if you control a face-up Flamvell monster except Neo Flamvell Origin, and your opponent controls, and your opponent has 3 or less cards in their graveyard, you can special summon this card from your hand. I will give it credit. If it is the first turn of the duel and you draw into this along with a fire monster, you'll be able to make yourself a neat little synchro. And that's about it, because the special summoning condition is alright-ish, but if you're going second or playing against anyone in the modern games, such as, I don't know, Lightsworns or any other deck that likes consistent graveyard setup, such as also Red Eyes are a nice example, you can basically forget about the special summoning condition because it's literally never going to go off, because, yeah, unless you're really confident that the opponent's graveyard is going to be as empty as possible because you're doing the whole graveyard banishing thing, as well as this archetype has been intending you to do, then I'd say go for it because it's one of their better tuner monsters, ironically enough. And now we move on to the level 3 Neo Flamvell Hedgehog. This is another level 3, this is our first level 3, I should say, and it's another tuner, that's what I meant to say. And when this card is destroyed by battle, select one card in your opponent's graveyard and banish it, and if this card is on the field is destroyed by a card effect, select one fire monster with 200 or less defense in your graveyard except Neo Flamvell Hedgehog and add it to your hand. Okay, so first of all, this one has the most underwhelming battle floating effect in the game because banishing a single card from the graveyard is not going to do anything much, and especially on a monster as unversatile as this. This ain't no Trishula I've ever seen. And while the second effect lets you recycle stuff from the graveyard, which is kind of neat, but getting someone to actually waste a removal effect on Neo Flamvell Hedgehog is basically the card game equivalent of finding Jesus. But you can make the argument that you can also use your own effects to pop this thing, but again, would you waste a removal effect on this thing? No, not really, especially since he just adds to the hand instead of resummons the monsters, so you're basically wasting resources for one of their spell cards, so yeah, it's not worth it. And even less worth it is Neo Flamvell Shaman, and this one, oh boy, you get a load of this. If this card destroys an opponent's monster by battle, while you have 3 or more Flamvell monsters in your graveyard, select one card in your opponent's graveyard, remove it from play, or banish it, and if your opponent does not have any spell cards in their graveyard, when this card activates, inflict 500 damage to your opponent. This is the prime example of the all bark and no bite. It just screams, I do a lot of stuff, and then he does absolutely nothing in significance. Because, well, I will give it credit. It does get one thing right, and that is that you'll be having your graveyard filled with Flamvell monsters. That is the truest thing this card has told us. 3 or more is definitely a right number here, and also banishing one card from the graveyard is basically a reverse of the Neo Flamvell Hedgehog, as in Hedgehog relies on getting destroyed by battle in order to remove one measly card from the graveyard, while this card relies on destroying something by battle in order to banish something, and then a measly 500 damage if the opponent has no spell cards in the graveyard, which will absolutely never go off due to the fact that every single deck in the universe actually runs spell card, unless, well, on a good day, if you actually manage to pull this against an Altergeist player, at which point you should just get the win. Anyway, don't run this. It does have decent attack values for a level 3, but just don't run this. It's not worth it. And next up we have Neo Flamvell Garuda, and this one is oh boy. During your end phase, if you control a face-up Flamvell monster, select one card in your opponent's graveyard and remove it from play. Okay, so this one requires it along with another Flamvell to be on the field in order to, again, banish one measly card from the opponent's graveyard. It's basically a worse DD Crow at that point, so yeah, and not to mention its defense value is not 200, so you cannot take advantage of their spell cards, so yeah, just don't run it. Now we return to the regular Flamewheels for a bit, first of which we have Flamewheel Archer. This is a tuner monster with 1000 attack and 200 defense, and once per turn you contribute one face-up Pyro type monster you control, and to have all Flamewheel monsters on the field gain 800 attack until the end phase. I honestly find this effect to be pretty neat actually, since you can actually basically normal summon this and then tribute it right away in order to raise the attack values of all your flame wheels. But the problem lies in the following, that flame wheels don't have that much of a good field presence generator within their own archetype besides the spell card, which we'll of course get into later. And second of all, this is a synchro spam archetype which relies on multiple monsters being on the field and not using them on the field for these kinds of effects, but do, you know, use them for synchro spamming. So yeah, unless you're building a somewhat inconsistent flame wheel beatdown with I don't know, something that can beat really hard in the archetype, I'd say run this then, but in any other case, run it if you need a better flame wheel tuner monster. Although Hedgehog is, yeah, the only other one so far is Hedgehog, and yeah, this is a better choice than Hedgehog, so yeah. Next up we have our first level 4 monster, Flamvell GRUNIKAR. This is a level 4 with the 1700 attack and 200 defense. And when this card destroys an opponent's monster by battle and sends it to the graveyard, inflict the damage to your opponent equal to the level of the destroyed monster by 200. It's one of their monsters which actually doesn't... yeah, this is actually a monster that actually benefits from Flamewheel Archer, but in that regard it's outclassed by KA2 Death Scissors, which when equipped with Moon Mirror Shield does a lot more damage for the same kind of effect, so yeah. But it is one of their bigger beat sticks, so you can make the most out of it, so yeah, run a couple of them. But it's a bit unclassed by their next monster, which is Flamewhell FIREDOG, which is a level 4 with 1900 attack and 200 defense, and when this card destroys an opponent's monster by battle and sends it to the graveyard, you can special summon a fire monster with 200 or less defense from your deck, except Flamewhell FIREDOG. Honestly, this is a very good card, no question about it. Not only summons monsters, fire monsters with 200 defense, but it also summons with 200 or less defense, so you can actually use some bit of a wider pool of monsters. And yeah, you can basically summon other monsters such as GRUNIKAR to continue the onslaught, or some of their tuner monsters to go into a synchro monster. So yeah, FIREDOG is definitely a trio-off staple right next to POUN. So yeah. Oh, next up we have an absolute blockbuster of a card. It's the legendary Flamvell Magician. It's a level 4 spellcaster tuner with 200 defense and 1400 attack. And while you control an ally of justice monster, this card gains 400 attack. This effect literally has no relevant utility or purpose whatsoever other than relying on referencing the dual terminal storyline, because that's apparently what you need in your card design. Freaking lore. Well, this actually appeared on my top 10 list of the 10 worst archetype support cards, and it's for a very good reason that it took the #1 spot on this list. Essentially, this card does not even gain 400 attack for each monster, for each ally of justice monster you control. Just brings itself to 1800 if you control any number of them, because, well, like, why not? Lore is more important again than actual card quality. But the funniest thing is that along with FIREDOG and POUN, this is a 3 of staple simply because there are no better options in the deck. Not even Archer is a better option here. You basically run this guy at 3 because it's a level 4 tuner with 200 defense, and it's also a spellcaster, so it does have some other support in terms of generic spellcaster support. And it used to be a very popular card when level 4 tuners were all the rage, and in the actual Flamvell deck it does get the job done, so essentially this thing is a vanilla monster, even though it's not technically a vanilla monster, so yeah. What a masterpiece, really. And now we move on to some other Neo Flamvell monsters, the last 2 Neo Flamvell monsters, and we start off with their newest piece of support, Neo Flamvell Lady. It has a quick effect which allows you to send a fire monster from your hand to the graveyard and target 1 card in your opponent's graveyard and banish it. And if this card is banished if a card is banished from your opponent's graveyard while you control this monster, except during the damage step, you can send 1 fire monster with 200 or less defense from your deck to the graveyard, except Neo Flamvell Lady, and you can only use each effect of Neo Flamvell Lady once per turn. It's basically one of the samier effects we've seen up until now, but I will give this thing credit due to the fact that her own effect is actually a quick effect, which is slightly better than what the other monsters were doing up until that point. And not to mention, she's also an archetypal Foolish Burial, so yeah, there's some graveyard setup for their spell card, so yeah, run 3. And now we move on to their final level 4, which is also their final Neo Flamvell card, Neo Flamvell Sabre. While your opponent has 4 or less cards in their graveyard, this card gains 600 attack, and while your opponent has 8 or more cards in their graveyard, this card loses 300 attack. Essentially, on turn 1, this can become a 2100 attack beatstick on a level 4, which is okay, but if it wasn't for that other effect which made it below average level 4 beatsticks, yeah, it's not worth running unless you're really, again, confident about that graveyard banishing shtick you're doing with the archetypes, so yeah. We move on to their first and only level 5, Flamvell Fiend. This one has 2100 attack and 1200 defense, and when this card inflicts battle damage to your opponent, inflict 200 damage to your opponent for each pyro type monster in your graveyard. I mean, the archetype does have its fair share of pyro monsters, but the fact of the matter is that most of them are actually not worth running. The only one that's actually worth running is Neo Flamvell Lady, and occasionally Flamvell Origin and Flamvell Archer, but yeah, the burn damage is going to be very insignificant by then, and not to mention it's a level 5 with 2100 attack and 1200 defense. So yeah, the stats are very horrible for this archetype. You might as well be running Neo Flamvell Sabre if you want a beatstick with 2100 attacks, so yeah. And their final monster of the main deck is the level 6 Flamvell Commando. This is a level 6 with 2200 attack and 200 defense, and this card cannot be special summoned. This card can only be normal summoned by tributing a Flamvell monster you control, and once per turn you can remove from play 1 monster in your opponent's graveyard with 200 defense to inflict damage to your opponent equal to that monster's attack. I would have loved this card if it wasn't for that clause where it cannot be special summoned, because if you actually summon it with FIREDOG, you can basically slam the opponent with 2200 damage and then remove something from the graveyard to inflict some additional damage. So yeah, it would be a decent one-off staple in the deck, but as it is now, it's a bit clunky and inconsistent to consider. And now we move on to their extra deck, first of which we have Flamvell Urukwizas. This is a level 6 monster, a level 6 synchro with 2100 attack and 400 defense. It's completely generic, and during the battle between the attacking, and it's affected that it inflicts piercing damage, and when this card destroys and when this card gains 300 attack each time it inflicts battle damage to your opponents. So essentially this card is actually very generic, since it was one of the first synchro monsters ever made, honestly, and it used to be a level 6 staple in basically any synchro deck until it was effectively replaced by better level 6 synchros such as Brionac, Duloran, and basically Goyo Guardian. Every single a good level 6 synchro that came around after it, so yeah. The only other problem I have with him is that he has 200 more defense than usually desirable, so yeah. And their final monster is the level 7 Ancient Flamewell Deity. This one is a level 7 with 2500 attack and 200 defense. Requires a Fire Tuner and one or more non-tuner Pyro type monsters. And when this card is synchro summoned, remove from play cards from your opponent's graveyard up to the number of cards in their hand. This card gains 200 attack for each card removed from play by this effect. On a good day, this card will have around 3000 attack, which is nice for a level 7 synchro, but if you take a closer look at this effect, it's kind of contradictory to the archetype. If you're actually summoning this thing in the actual Flame build, focusing on banishing stuff from the graveyard, you might not have enough stuff left to banish, since if you're actually pulling off the graveyard banishing gimmick consistently, the thing will not have that much stuff to banish. So yeah, it's worth running, but not at any more than one, due to the fact that the effect will literally never go off the way it was intended to, since there will not be enough targets left to banish. So yeah, but if you're bringing it out without actually doing anything from the graveyard, then it might actually banish something, a decent number of cards, provided that the opponent has a decent number of cards in his hand in order to pull that off. So yeah. And now for their spell card, which has been mentioned quite numerously, and for a good reason, because it's actually one of their better cards, and in fact it was limited for a long time. So everyone give a round of applause for the normal spell Rekindling. Special summon from your graveyard as many fire monsters as possible with 200 defense, but banish them during the end phase of this turn. So quick and simple, this is an soul charge for fire monsters with 200 defense, which is basically a play enabler for a dozen fire-based archetypes, such as not only Flame Walls, but also Hazy Flames, Fire Kings, Fire Fists, or basically any fire-based decks that have monsters with 200 defense. So yeah, it was limited for a very good reason, but now it's back at 3, like it is in the OCG, so you can abuse it as much as you want. And I'm only really hoping that the regular soul charge gets back at least 1, because I really miss it. So yeah. And their final card is the Counter Trap Flamewell Counter. When a spell or trap card is activated, banish one fire monster with 200 defense from your graveyard to negate the activation and destroy it. As far as archetypal counter stuff goes, it's pretty good. It negates any spell or trap card, which I really like, although I wish it was also active on monster effects. And it does not only support Flame Wells, but basically any fire-based deck that runs monsters with 200 defense. So yeah, I'd say definitely run this one. And now it's time for the grades. In terms of consistency, well, FIREDOG relies on running over stuff to search stuff. POUN relies on getting attacked. And that's about it when it comes to consistency. Generic fire support is also pretty much somewhat non-existent, other than Royal Firestorm Guards, which basically is focusing also on fetching stuff from the graveyard. And yeah, it's a 1 out of 3 when you ask me. In terms of power, the only legitimate powerhouse in the archetype are the synchros, and those synchros are not that much worth running, so yeah, that's also 1 out of 3. Now, comeback ability, I will give a solid 2 out of 3, simply due to the existence of Rekindling and Flamewell Counter, due to how versatile they can really be. And yeah, the archetypes they originate from are the ones that least benefit from using it, and yeah, it's kind of sad, isn't it? And now in terms of protection, well, there's absolutely none here. I'm really, there was literally none of the effects that I went through had any semblance of a protection effect, besides Flamewell Counter, which is still a counter trap which has specific activation conditions, and it does not protect you from everything. And as for the versatility, well, Rekindling is splashable in various fire-based decks, and the Flame Wells themselves are not splashable in anything. Flame Well Counter is also fairly splashable, but then again, every single fire-based deck has slightly fallen out of relevance in the past years, so it's a one of the three realistically. And yeah, this archetype could have basically become the beta version of Gravekeepers with the whole graveyard banishing shtick, but it failed to realize that potential due to the god-awful execution of their main deck monsters. Ancient Flamewell Deity had the right idea at least, but the problem here is if not having enough resources to banish stuff, or not having enough targets to banish themselves. So yeah, they really needed something to give them consistent access to banishing multiple cards from the opponent's graveyard per turn in order to produce some long-lasting relevant results. But we need to wait some more if the actual new support wave will arrive for this archetype. I mean, we got Neo Flamewell Lady years after the archetype has been released, so who knows, we might see some other stuff in the future as well, so yeah. But as for me, I'm done with this archetype and with this archetype analysis, and next time we'll be going back to the GX era once again before we take another step back into the 5Ds era some more. And yeah, I'll see you then. Thank you all so much for watching. Stay tuned for more vids, and updates. Comment, like, and subscribe. As usual, I'll upload the next vid whenever I can. Be sure to check out my Patreon when you got the time. Maybe drop a few donations if you feel like it. And I'll see you all and have a good day. Peace!